My name is Alex. I worked for a massive tech corporation in a building that felt more like a sleek, humming sarcophagus than an office. We had keycard access for everything. The tactile texture of my access badge, cool plastic with a crisp company logo, was the single most important object in my life. It was my identity, my access, my validation. Without it, I was nothing. The layoff was abrupt, cold, and delivered by a pre-recorded, emotionless voice over a video call. When the call ended, my laptop screen went blank. My life evaporated. The security team met me in the lobby, silent, and took my keys. Except for my access badge. They didn't ask for the badge. It was a meaningless piece of plastic now, a useless souvenir. I kept it. I took it home, tossed it on my nightstand, beside my phone. The psychological dread began not with the loss of the job, but with the loss of routine, the sudden void. My apartment felt too big, the silence too loud. I missed the specific high-frequency sound of the lobby turnstile whirring as I scanned in, the sound that confirmed my worth. 3 days after the firing, driven by a terrible mix of denial and desperation, I drove back to the office building in the middle of the night. I just wanted to see the place, to feel the cold, corporate reality one last time. The parking garage was empty. The light inside the lobby was the same sterile white I always remembered, a light that knew no warmth. I took out my badge. It was dead. I knew it was. But I held it up to the scanner on the lobby door. A pathetic, final gesture. Beep. The green light flashed. The lock clicked. The doors hissed open. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs, the sound deafening in the silence. I should have run. This was malfunctioning or haunted technology, a security flaw, or maybe a terrible oversight. But the irrational part of me, the part that missed my routine, walked in. The security desk was empty. I felt a cold wave of supernatural unease as I realized my badge wasn't deactivated. The company hadn't let me go. It was still expecting me. I spent an hour wandering the silent, darkened floors. My old cubicle was exactly as I had left it. I touched the cool plastic of my desk phone, the tactile texture familiar and comforting. Then, I heard a faint, persistent sound, the soft, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a keyboard coming from the empty hallway. It was the sound of work that wasn't being done by anyone human. I crept toward the sound. It was coming from the executive conference room. The room was dark, but the large presentation screen was glowing with the harsh blue-white light of a spreadsheet. There was no one inside, but the keyboard was moving, the keys pressing down slowly, deliberately. I looked closer at the spreadsheet. It was a projection of the company's next round of layoffs, and at the top of the list, flashing red, was my name. Not as a former employee, but as a current project. Project Alex. I was being managed, not fired. Then I heard my voice. It was a recorded whisper coming from the speakers, an environmental echo or repeating sound. I need to work harder. I need to prove myself. I can't fail them. I had recorded that desperate motivational memo for myself months ago. The sound repeated. The keyboard clacked once more, deleting my name from the layoff list, only to replace it with a new, much higher number. Project Alex. Total time remaining, 0 hours. I realized the badge hadn't been deactivated because I was still logged in. The building itself, the corporate system, required my presence, my life, to fuel its process. It was a place that resists being left. The badge was my leash, and my desperation had brought me back. The system had claimed ownership of my time, right down to the last second. I smashed the badge on the floor outside the building, but the green light is still pulsing in my memory, waiting for me to step back inside. My name is Sarah. I was a loan officer during the financial crisis. My job was to approve foreclosures, to sign the paperwork that ruined lives. I hated it. But the money was excellent, and the silence of my own guilt was deafening. My personal guilt, or moral failure, wasn't in doing the job but in finding ways to rationalize the systemic harm. I would use a specific red marker to sign the final, crushing documents, telling myself the harsh color reflected the gravity of the decision. The blood I was metaphorically drawing. The ink smelled faintly of synthetic cherry and cheap plastic. When I was laid off, the news was delivered in a small, empty office. They gave me a box for my things. I packed my picture frames, my ergonomic mouse, and my special red marker. I kept it as a reminder of the power I had wielded. After a few weeks of silence at home, applying for jobs, I started hearing a faint, dry sound late at night. It was a rhythmic scratching noise coming from my box of office supplies, like a small caged animal trying to escape. I found my red marker lying next to the sample foreclosure papers I'd taken home. Just sample copies, but I knew what they represented. The marker wasn't moving, yet the scratching persisted. But the papers were changing. In the margins, written in the same distinctive red ink, were small, frantic lines, numbers, and dates that weren't there before. The psychological dread was immediate. This was an anomalous or cursed object, the embodiment of my past actions. I started logging the changes. The notes were always about debt. The scratch marks would form complex pattern or number sequence that shouldn't exist, tallying up the collective losses of the families I had foreclosed on. The numbers were infinite, non-repeating, and chillingly precise. My marker, the symbol of my guilt, was continuing its work without me. I tried to get rid of it. I threw the red marker in the kitchen trash, burying it beneath coffee grounds and refuse. The next morning, it was back on my desk, lying next to a blank sheet of paper, ready to work. It was cold to the tactile texture, radiating a strange, dry heat that made my skin crawl. The air in the room felt heavy, metallic, like the presence of a massive, unseen spreadsheet. The ultimate terror was the change in the content. The frantic lines of debt collection stopped. They were replaced by letters. The red marker, moving invisibly while I was in the next room, began writing out names of the people whose houses I had signed away. One night, I woke up to a faint, pulsing red light coming from the living room. I crept out of bed. The marker was upright on the coffee table, vibrating slightly, humming with a low-frequency sound. On the wall above the fireplace, written in perfect, sweeping red ink, was a massive, confident signature, Sarah. Not written by me, but written for me, claiming ownership. The final memory distortion or false perception was watching the words change, the ink still wet. The signature morphed from Sarah to Oed. The marker was calculating my personal balance. The collective loss now transferred from the documents to my own existence. The pen I used to inflict debt was now collecting it from me. I was the asset being foreclosed upon. I burned the marker and the papers, but every time I look at my hand, I see a faint red residue on my index finger, waiting to sign the next piece of paper. I was a software project manager, leading a small team. My boss, Frank, was notorious for firing people by simply ghosting them, deleting their access, unscheduling meetings, then denying they ever worked there. When my turn came, it wasn't a call or an email. My corporate Slack went silent. My company email vanished. I was officially a non-person. The human betrayal, stalking, or manipulation was the total, clinical erasure of my digital existence. I sat in my empty apartment, gripped by psychological dread. I couldn't reach Frank. I couldn't even prove I had worked there, as all my projects were now scrubbed from the public site. I started trying to contact my old team members. They wouldn't respond. I tried personal email, text messages, even LinkedIn. Silence. Not silence of avoidance, but a profound, unnatural silence, as if I had truly ceased to exist, not just professionally, but universally. My horror deepened when I realized the silence was not human. I started getting notifications on my personal devices, calendar invites, Slack messages, emails, all addressed to me but appearing as empty alerts. I would click on them, and the screen would be a blank white light, followed by a flat, high-pitched sound, like a dial tone that never connected. This was malfunctioning or haunted technology operating beyond my former company's server. I ran a diagnostic on my own systems. I found an encrypted string embedded in my router's firmware. It was an access key, designed to block all incoming and outgoing communication linked to my name. Frank hadn't just fired me. He had activated a private, automated algorithm designed to maintain my digital erasure. It was an environmental echo or repeating sound of my job loss, played out across the network. I tried to hack the block. I worked for 3 days straight, drinking cold, stale coffee, the tactile texture of the laptop keys rough under my shaking fingers. Every time I tried to delete the access key, my screen would flash, and I would hear a quick, dry whisper from the speakers, a fragment of Frank's voice. I never saw her before. Who are you? The algorithm was using Frank's words to taunt me. The most terrifying moment was the discovery of the algorithm's ultimate purpose. It wasn't just blocking communication. It was slowly, meticulously deleting all digital records tied to me. Bank statements, social security records, driver's license data. I saw it on the screen. A frantic, repeating pattern or number sequence that shouldn't exist. Flashing sequences of code indicating file deletions. I realized the algorithm was not just erasing my work history. It was erasing my identity to maintain Frank's perfect, clean narrative. Frank's ghosting was being executed by a digital ghost. The algorithm's only goal was to achieve perfect zero knowledge of my existence. The final terror was the pattern of light. Every time a deletion occurred, the ambient light in my room would dim slightly, then return. A subtle, quick pulse. I looked at my fingers and realized the light was dimming because the power grid itself was slowly forgetting who I was. My existence was consuming electricity, and that consumption was now being audited. I finally deleted the algorithm, but I still check my bank account daily, terrified that the balance will suddenly revert to zero, or worse, my name will disappear completely. If your identity was digitally erased, how would you convince the world you exist? I was laid off from my marketing job and immediately plunged into the hell of job searching. I started spending all my time in a small, empty basement office, a temporary workspace I found cheaply. It was damp, smelled of concrete and old paper, and was illuminated by a single harsh fluorescent tube whose light hummed ceaselessly, a low, persistent frequency that vibrated in my teeth. I was applying for a prestigious position at a competitor. The application process was grueling, involving 3 weeks of nonstop testing, essays, and virtual interviews. The constant stress caused serious memory distortion or false perception. I started forgetting which company I was interviewing for, and even which day it was. The process was designed to strip away time and identity. The psychological dread peaked when I realized the interviews were repeating. Not just the questions, but the exact phrasing, the interviewer's background, and the subtle rhythmic thump-thump sound of the cooling fan in the interviewer's background. This was the same interview, over and over, every day, perfectly looped. I checked my calendar. It showed that I had the final interview scheduled every single day for the past month. I couldn't escape the pattern. I tried to cancel, to delete the recurring meeting, but the calendar entry would simply snap back, the screen flashing with a tiny green light before reverting. This was a place that resists being left, not physically, but chronologically, locking me into a purgatory of assessment. The tactile texture of the old wooden desk became abrasive under my forearms. I was carving grooves into the surface with my pen during the relentless interview loops. The humidity in the basement office was oppressive, a constant reminder of the damp rot. The fear was that the company wasn't choosing a candidate. They were testing the boundaries of my sanity, seeing how long I could maintain a professional facade while being perpetually interviewed. One day, the interviewer, a placid woman named Elena, asked me a question I couldn't answer. Tell me the single most important contribution you have made to this company. The company I had never worked for. I confessed my confusion, telling her I was in a loop, that I'd been laid off, and that she was interviewing me forever. Elena smiled, a terrifying, vacant smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her background fan sound suddenly stopped. The silence was absolute. She pointed a finger at the screen. "You haven't been laid off," she said, her voice an environmental echo or repeating sound of my own internalized failure. "You are still working. Your contribution is your time, your fear, your struggle. That is the product. Your output is your sustained anxiety." I scrambled away from my desk, knocking over the chair. I realized the company I was perpetually interviewing for wasn't a competitor. It was the system of perpetual employment itself. The basement was the engine, and my anxiety was the fuel. The key mystery was why I was chosen. I looked back at the screen. Elena's image dissolved, replaced by a spreadsheet. The column header read, "Labor." Underneath it was a single number, climbing rapidly. 120. 0, 0, 0, 0. My 2-hour duration, now measured in total mental expenditure. I was paying my time to the system just to stay in the running, locked into an endless cycle of self-assessment and debt. I quit the basement office, but I still wake up terrified when I hear the low hum of a fluorescent light, waiting for the final interview to begin again. I was fired for corporate espionage, unjustly, I swear. They believed I leaked sensitive client information, but I was framed by a coworker I deeply trusted, Mark. The human betrayal, stalking, or manipulation was total. He not only took my job, but also destroyed my reputation. After the firing, my home became my prison. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. It wasn't paranoia. It was a cold, certain knowledge that Mark was enjoying my ruin. I started seeing small, subtle signs of his presence. My coffee machine would be slightly adjusted. My laptop lid left ajar. Tiny details only I would notice. The background detail of my tidy apartment became a stage for his surveillance. I found the source in the living room. A tiny high-tech microphone lodged inside an antique clock, an anomalous or cursed object gifted to me by Mark years ago. It was still recording, still watching. I tried to dismantle the clock, but its wooden casing was strangely warm to the tactile texture, and the mechanisms felt sticky, resisting my attempts. I left it alone, knowing Mark was listening. My new mission became making my suffering boring. But the clock did more than listen. It started counting. Every night, precisely at midnight, The second hand would stop for a moment, then it would jump ahead by 5 minutes, then stop again. A strange, silent pattern or number sequence that shouldn't exist. I realized the clock was not just recording my audio. It was counting the time I wasted, the time I wasn't being productive, the time I was suffering. One day, the clock's face cracked vertically, directly down the middle. I rushed to it. I heard a faint, frantic sound coming from the mechanisms, the environmental echo or repeating sound of a man sobbing. It was Mark's voice, desperate and broken. I listened closely, the cold light of the hallway reflecting off the cracked glass. Mark wasn't laughing at my suffering. He was crying about his own. He confessed in that broken whisper to framing me, to being miserable, to regretting the betrayal. The clock wasn't broadcasting my suffering. It was broadcasting his guilt. I realized the clock was not a camera. It was a conduit. When Mark framed me, he didn't just take my job. He transferred his own immense personal guilt or moral failure into the clock, which then manifested as my feeling of being stalked. He wasn't watching me. He was projecting his torment onto my life. The clock was a lens for his shame, and my job loss was the antenna. The final terror was the pattern of the hands. The clock stopped moving entirely. Both the minute and hour hands were fixed on the number 12. It wasn't midnight. It was a perfect, unmoving reflection of my perpetual unemployment and his endless guilt. I didn't smash the clock because I needed to keep hearing his regret. A sound that now keeps me focused on getting my life back. What is the most terrifying way time itself can be stolen from you during unemployment? This is Dread Dynasty, where nightmares come to life. Thank you for watching tonight's stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because the next nightmare is closer than you think. Check the channel for more interesting nightmare.